The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Westfield Corporate Center as Ray Henderson pushed his cleaning cart down the long, polished hallway. At 42, his shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of years spent scrubbing floors that weren't his, in buildings where people barely noticed him. But those same shoulders had carried much heavier burdens over the past 3 years. The badge clipped to his blue uniform, shirt read maintenance staff, but it might as well have said invisible man, for all the attention most employees paid him. Ray didn't mind, though. Being invisible had its advantages, like the peace to think about his 2 kids while he worked, and the ability to move through the building like a ghost, listening to classical piano compositions through a single earbud. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," called the security guard as Ray signed in for his shift. "Morning, Bill," Ray replied with a genuine smile. Bill was one of the few who treated him like a person rather than part of the furniture. "How's your daughter doing at college?" "Loving it. Says the chemistry program is exactly what she wanted." Bill beamed. "How about your kids?" Ray's face brightened. "Tommy's got a math test today. Been practicing multiplication tables all week. And Lily," his voice softened with pride, "she's playing Twinkle Twinkle on the piano now. Only 6 years old." The security guard nodded appreciatively, unaware that Ray had taught his daughter those first simple notes on a second-hand keyboard in their small apartment. The same fingers that would soon be mopping floors and scrubbing toilets, gracefully demonstrating proper hand position. As Ray walked away, he checked his phone once more before tucking it into his pocket. No messages from Mrs. Parker, the elderly neighbor who watched his children before school. Good sign. Last week Tommy had woken with a fever, and Ray had nearly lost a day's pay staying home. As a single parent, every dollar mattered. 3 years ago, life had been entirely different. Ray had been finishing his master's degree in piano performance at the conservatory, his wife Annie cheering him on while working as a nurse to support them. They'd had plans. He would teach at the university level, perform on weekends, maybe even tour during summers. Their small family would have a comfortable life filled with music and stability. Then came the diagnosis. Aggressive cancer. 9 months later, Annie was gone, leaving Ray with 2 small children, mountains of medical debt, and a half-finished degree that suddenly seemed as practical as fairy dust. He'd tried to make it work. For 6 months, he'd juggled part-time piano gigs at restaurants and bars, teaching beginner students when he could find them. But the hours were unpredictable, the pay inconsistent, and childcare costs ate most of what he earned. When Tommy started kindergarten needing stability more than ever, Ray made the hardest decision of his life. He put his piano dreams on a shelf and took the janitor position at Westfield Corporate Center. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were steady. 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., home in time for when the kids finished school. The building management didn't care about his unfinished degree or his previous life. They needed someone reliable who wouldn't complain about cleaning up other people's messes. Ray reached the executive floor and began his usual routine. The fancy offices up here were barely used but required daily attention anyway. He dusted the mahogany desks, vacuumed plush carpets, and emptied nearly empty trash cans. Through the glass walls, he could see the morning bustle beginning below. People in expensive suits carrying coffee cups, greeting each other with professional smiles that rarely reached their eyes. In the corner office belonging to the CEO, a Ms. Chen, according to the nameplate, Ray paused by the small grand piano that sat as decoration near the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a beautiful instrument, probably worth more than he'd make in 3 years. Every morning he allowed himself 10 seconds to stand before it, never touching, just remembering. "Excuse me, what are you doing in here?" Ray jumped, nearly knocking over his cart. A young woman in a tailored suit stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. "Sorry, ma'am. Just cleaning." Ray stepped back from the piano, gesturing to his cart. "Ms. Chen has a meeting in 30 minutes. You'll need to come back later," she said, barely looking at him as she tapped something into her tablet. "Of course. I'll just get the trash and be out of your way," Ray replied politely, moving efficiently to complete his task. The woman had already forgotten his presence, speaking rapidly into her phone about schedule changes and catering orders. As he slipped out of the office, Ray heard her mention something about a company gala happening next week. These corporate parties were always extra work for the maintenance staff. Spilled drinks, discarded appetizers, and the entitled assumption that someone else would clean up the mess. But they also meant overtime pay, which Ray desperately needed. Tommy needed new shoes, and winter was coming. Back in the main hallway, Ray continued his rounds, the routine so familiar he could do it on autopilot. Empty trash, dust surfaces, vacuum floors, clean glass, scrub bathrooms, repeat. The monotony allowed his mind to wander to more important things: the rent due next week, Lily's upcoming doctor's appointment, the piano lessons he'd been giving to neighborhood children in the evenings for extra cash. Those evening lessons were his one remaining connection to his former life. 3 nights a week after putting his own children to bed, he taught basics to beginners on the old upright piano in Mrs. Geller's basement apartment. She let him use it in exchange for teaching her granddaughter for free. The extra $40 per student each month helped with groceries. He never told anyone at Westfield about his music background. What would be the point? The executives who occasionally nodded at him in hallways wouldn't care that he could play Rachmaninoff from memory, or that he'd once performed with the city orchestra. Here he was just the janitor, a function, not a person. By lunchtime, Ray had finished the executive floor and moved down to the main lobby. The atrium was being transformed for the upcoming gala, with workers setting up lighting and sound equipment. In the center of the space, they were positioning a gleaming concert grand piano on a small platform. "Careful with that. That's a rental. Costs more than your annual salary," barked a man in an expensive suit to the moving crew. Ray recognized him as one of the marketing directors, a man who had never once acknowledged Ray's existence despite passing him in hallways for 3 years. Ray watched from a distance as the piano was unceremoniously plunked into place. Even from across the room, he could tell it wasn't properly positioned on the platform, and he doubted anyone had arranged for it to be tuned after transport. His fingers itched with the automatic desire to test the keys, adjust the bench, check the pedals. Instead, he pushed his cart toward the men's restroom, where someone had reported a leaky faucet. As he passed a group of young executives huddled near the coffee station, he heard snippets of their conversation. "Can you believe Chen expects us to find a decent pianist by Friday? Where are we supposed to find someone who can play background music for 3 hours without embarrassing the company? Just hire a college student. Nobody listens to the music anyway. Chen wants to impress the Japanese investors. You know how they are about culture and all that." Ray kept his head down as he passed, but his mind raced. He could play for 3 hours without repeating a piece. He could impress any investor with his interpretation of Chopin or Debussy. But they would never ask him, and he would never offer. Those worlds didn't intersect anymore. In the bathroom, Ray fixed the leaky faucet and began cleaning the mirrors. The face that looked back at him sometimes felt like a stranger's, older than his years, with lines around the eyes that hadn't been there before Annie got sick. His hands, once his pride with long, nimble fingers perfect for spanning octaves, now showed the wear of harsh cleaning chemicals and physical labor. But when he looked closer, he could still see traces of the man he'd been before. His eyes held the same passion when he taught little Lily to play her first songs. His hands still moved with grace even when holding a mop instead of dancing across piano keys. And in quiet moments when the building was empty, sometimes he would hum complex melodies as he worked, the music never quite leaving him even when everything else had changed. As Ray finished his shift and prepared to leave for the day, he passed through the atrium once more. The piano sat silent and untouched on its platform. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would feel like to sit there, to place his hands on those keys, to fill this cold corporate space with something real and beautiful. The fantasy lasted only seconds before reality returned. He had to pick up the kids, help with homework, make dinner, and prepare for tomorrow's piano lessons. His life had narrow margins now, no room for dreams that didn't put food on the table. Yet as he walked out into the afternoon sunlight, Ray felt the familiar melody of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 playing in his mind, the piece he'd been practicing when Annie first got sick. He hadn't touched it since her funeral. Perhaps tonight, after the children were asleep, he would try to play it again on their small keyboard with the headphones plugged in. Some things, once part of your soul, never truly leave you, even when life forces you to look the other way. The day of the Westfield Corporate Center's annual gala arrived with an unexpected flurry of activity. Ray pushed his cleaning cart through the lobby at 6:15 a.m. earlier than usual, dodging event staff who were already setting up elaborate floral arrangements and testing lighting systems. His supervisor had called the night before, asking all maintenance staff to come in early to make sure everything was spotless before the evening's festivities. Henderson, called Mr. Patterson, the head of building maintenance, waving Ray over to a corner where several other janitors were gathering. "You'll be on standby tonight during the event. Wear the black uniform, not the blue. Company wants us to blend in better with the walls." He chuckled without humor. 5 to midnight overtime pay. Ray's stomach sank. He'd arranged for Mrs. Parker to watch the kids until 8 p.m. His usual overtime shift end. Finding someone for midnight would be nearly impossible on such short notice, but he couldn't afford to say no to the extra hours. He'd have to call in a favor from his brother-in-law, even though asking for help from Annie's family still felt like failing her somehow. "Yes, sir," Ray nodded, already mentally rearranging his evening. Tommy's homework would have to wait until morning, and he'd miss putting Lily to bed. The familiar guilt of an absent parent settled on his shoulders like an old heavy coat. The morning passed in a blur of extra cleaning tasks. By lunchtime, Ray's back ached from scrubbing baseboards and polishing every reflective surface on the ground floor. He slipped away to the staff break room to call his brother-in-law, grateful when Dave agreed to pick up the kids from Mrs. Parker's and stay overnight. Another debt he'd need to repay. When Ray returned to the atrium, a small commotion had broken out near the grand piano. A harried-looking woman in a tailored suit was gesturing frantically while speaking into her phone. "What do you mean he's sick?" "The gala is in 6 hours." She paced around the piano, her voice rising with each word. "No, we can't just pipe in music. Ms. Chen specifically requested live piano music for the Japanese investors." Ray kept his head down as he wiped fingerprints from a nearby glass panel, but his ears perked up. The woman ended her call with a frustrated grunt. "Problem with the entertainment?" asked one of the young executives who'd sauntered over, coffee cup in hand. "Our pianist has food poisoning," the woman, Ray recognized her now as Ms. Chen's assistant, replied. "Says he's in the emergency room, and every agency I've called is booked solid for Friday night events." The executive shrugged. "Just find someone who can play Happy Birthday and Chopsticks. After a few drinks, no one will care." "You don't know Ms. Chen very well, do you?" The assistant's voice was icy. "She'll notice, and so will Mr. Tanaka. This deal is worth millions." Ray moved his cleaning to another area, still listening as the assistant made more frantic calls. He should say something. He could solve her problem in an instant, but the thought of revealing that part of himself here, in this place where he was just the invisible cleaning guy, made his throat close up. He'd kept his world separate for a reason. The afternoon dragged on as Ray completed his regular duties plus the extra gala preparations. At 4:30, he slipped away to the maintenance locker room to change into the invisible black uniform and call his kids before the evening shift began. "Dad, I got an A on my math test." Tommy's voice crackled through the phone's speaker. "That's amazing, buddy. I knew all that practice would pay off." Ray smiled, leaning against the cold metal lockers. "When are you coming home?" The question pierced through Ray's chest like it always did. "I have to work late tonight, remember? Uncle Dave is going to stay with you guys. But I promise we'll do something fun on Sunday, okay?" After saying goodnight to both children and reminding Lily to practice her piano exercises, Ray hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment. 3 years of hard choices, of putting stability over dreams, of being two parents when he barely felt like one most days. Was it worth it? The question haunted him on nights like these. By 6 p.m., the atrium had transformed. String lights twinkled from the ceiling, turning the corporate space into something almost magical. Catering staff arranged elaborate food stations while bartenders set up at multiple points around the room. The grand piano gleamed under a single spotlight in the corner, untouched and waiting. Ray busied himself with emptying trash bins and making sure the bathrooms stayed pristine as early guests began to arrive. Men in expensive suits and women in cocktail dresses filtered in, their conversations a gentle hum that grew louder as the space filled. Ray noticed Ms. Chen, the CEO, greeting important-looking guests near the entrance, her sharp eyes missing nothing. At 7:30, the assistant who had been panicking about the pianist earlier hurried over to Ms. Chen, whispering urgently in her ear. The CEO's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened slightly. She nodded once and continued smiling at guests as if nothing was wrong. Ray moved through the crowd like a shadow, picking up discarded napkins and empty glasses. As he passed near a group of young executives from the marketing department, he overheard their conversation. "Chen's furious about the pianist," one said, sipping champagne. "Apparently the replacement they found just called to say he's stuck in traffic and won't make it until at least 9. Tanaka and the Japanese delegation arrive in 15 minutes, another added. You know how much emphasis their culture places on these details. If the musical portion of the evening falls apart, it could affect the whole deal. Ray glanced over at the piano, sitting silent under its spotlight. His fingers twitched at his sides. "Hey," one of the executives suddenly turned, noticing Ray for perhaps the first time ever. "You work here, right?" Ray nodded, wondering if they needed something cleaned up. "Can you play piano?" The question was clearly a joke, accompanied by snickers from the man's colleagues. "We're desperate here." Ray froze, paper napkins clutched in his gloved hand. 3 years of carefully separating his worlds, of being invisible, of putting aside dreams for practicality. All of it hung in the balance of his answer. "I mean, how hard can it be to play some background music?" continued the executive, clearly not expecting a real answer from the janitor. "Just hit some keys, right?" Something shifted in Ray's chest. Maybe it was the dismissive tone, or the memory of Tommy's voice asking when he'd be home, or just the accumulated weight of all the small indignities that came with being seen as nothing more than your uniform. "I can play," he said quietly. The executive blinked in surprise, then burst out laughing. "Of course you can. Hey guys, our janitor says he can save the day." He turned back to Ray with a mocking smile. "Go on then, Beethoven. Show us what you've got." The other young executives joined in the laughter, clearly enjoying what they saw as a joke at the janitor's expense. One of them called out to a colleague across the room, "Hey Jackson, the cleaning guy says he can fill in for the pianist." Heads turned. Ray felt his face growing hot with a mixture of embarrassment and something else, anger perhaps, or determination. He glanced toward the entrance where Ms. Chen was now greeting an elderly Japanese man who must be the important Mr. Tanaka. The assistant who had been dealing with the pianist crisis rushed over, her eyes wide with desperation and disbelief. "You can play? For real?" she asked Ray, clearly willing to grasp at any possibility. Ray nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I can play. What's your repertoire?" she asked, eyeing him skeptically. "Classical mainly. Chopin, Debussy, Beethoven, Mozart. Some contemporary pieces, too." The words felt strange coming out of his mouth in this setting, wearing this uniform. The assistant looked at him for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks. Behind her, the marketing executives were still chuckling, waiting for the punchline to what they thought was an elaborate joke. "Can you play now?" "Right now?" she asked. Ray glanced at his watch. His shift wouldn't officially end until midnight. "But I need to ask my supervisor," he said. 2 minutes later, after a hurried conversation with Mr. Patterson, who seemed equally skeptical but unwilling to interfere with something the CEO's assistant had requested, Ray found himself approaching the grand piano. Whispers followed him. He caught fragments of conversations. "Is that the janitor? What is Chen thinking? This will be hilarious." As he crossed the atrium floor, the black uniform felt suddenly too tight, too hot. Ray removed his gloves and tucked them into his pocket. He wiped his hands on his pants, a nervous habit from his conservatory days. As he reached the piano, he adjusted the bench slightly and sat down, taking a deep breath. The spotlight felt hot on his face. Around him, the party had quieted somewhat as people turned to see what was happening. At the front of the room, Ray could see Ms. Chen watching with an inscrutable expression, the Japanese delegation beside her. For a brief, terrifying moment, Ray's mind went blank. It had been so long since he'd played on a proper piano, in front of people who weren't 6-year-old students or his own children. Then he thought of Annie, who had believed in his talent even when he doubted himself. He thought of Tommy and Lily, who deserved to see their father as more than just someone who cleaned up after others. Ray placed his hands on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath his calloused fingers, and he began to play. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated through the atrium, gentle and hesitant at first, like raindrops at the beginning of a summer shower. Ray's fingers remembered the piece before his mind did, muscle memory taking over as he eased into the familiar melody. He had played this as a lullaby for Lily countless times on their small keyboard at home. The soothing patterns a balm for both father and daughter at the end of difficult days. A hush fell over the nearest group of partygoers, their champagne glasses pausing midway to their lips. Ray kept his eyes on the keys, too afraid to look up and see the expressions on their faces. Was it shock? Mockery? Pity? He didn't want to know yet. Instead, he let himself sink deeper into the music, his touch becoming more confident with each measure. The piano itself was magnificent, responsive in ways his home keyboard could never be, allowing for subtleties of expression he had almost forgotten were possible. As the piece built toward its gentle climax, Ray felt something unlock inside his chest, like a door long rusted shut suddenly swinging open. When the final notes of Clair de Lune faded into the atrium's high ceiling, there was a moment of complete silence. Ray still couldn't bring himself to look up. Then, to his surprise, applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing stronger. He finally raised his eyes to see the marketing executives who had mocked him moments before, standing with expressions of undisguised astonishment. Ms. Chen's assistant hurried over, her earlier skepticism replaced with barely contained excitement. "That was beautiful," she whispered urgently. "Can you keep playing?" "Similar pieces, perhaps?" Mr. Tanaka appears quite impressed. Ray nodded, his throat too tight for words. His gaze drifted across the room to where Ms. Chen stood with the Japanese delegation. The CEO's normally impassive face showed a flicker of interest as she inclined her head slightly in his direction. Beside her, the elderly Mr. Tanaka was smiling, leaning toward her to comment on something. Drawing a deep breath, Ray turned back to the piano. If they wanted more, he would give them more. Not for the executives who had laughed at him, but for himself. For the part of him that had been silenced for too long. He launched into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the pieces he had been preparing for his final recital before Annie got sick. The flowing melody emerged from under his fingers with surprising ease, as if the notes had been waiting inside him all this time. As he played, Ray allowed himself to get lost in the music in a way he hadn't in years. Around him the party continued, but now with his playing as the heartbeat of the event, rather than mere background noise. People gathered closer to the piano, conversations quieting. Even the servers paused momentarily in their duties. Trays balanced carefully as they listened. From the corner of his eye, Ray caught sight of Mr. Patterson, his supervisor, standing by a column with his mouth slightly open. Next to him, one of Ray's fellow janitors gave a subtle thumbs up, a gesture of solidarity that nearly made Ray's fingers stumble on the keys. The nocturne led into a Schubert impromptu, which flowed into a Mozart sonata movement. Ray played continuously, one piece blending into the next, afraid that if he stopped, the spell would break and reality would come crashing back. The reality where he was just the janitor, the invisible man, the single dad who couldn't afford to dream. An hour passed, though it felt like minutes. The tension that had lived between Ray's shoulder blades for 3 years began to dissolve. His body remembered this feeling, the rightness of sitting at a piano, of creating something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. For the first time since Annie's death, he felt fully present, fully alive. During a brief pause between pieces, Ray glanced up to find the crowd around the piano had grown considerably. Most surprising was the presence of Ms. Chen herself, standing at the outer edge of the circle with Mr. Tanaka and his delegation. The CEO's sharp eyes were fixed on Ray with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. Ray shifted on the bench, suddenly aware of his janitor's uniform, of the incongruity of his presence at this piano. He should play something impressive now, something to show that his earlier pieces weren't just lucky coincidences. His fingers hovered over the keys as he made his decision. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor had been the last piece he and Annie had discussed before her diagnosis. "You play it like you're telling a story," she had said, lying beside him on their bed, her head on his shoulder as they listened to a recording. "Someday you'll play it for a real audience and they'll understand the story too." That someday had never come. Until now, perhaps, the opening notes of the ballade resonated through the atrium, questioning, hesitant, like someone testing whether it's safe to reveal a long-held secret. Then the main theme emerged, a melody of such profound longing that Ray felt his throat tighten. He had avoided this piece since Annie's funeral, too afraid of what emotions it might unlock. As the complexity increased, Ray's technical skills, rusty but still present, rose to meet the challenge. his hands stretched for difficult intervals, his fingers finding pathways through thorny passages that had once required hours of practice. There was freedom in this moment, a sense that nothing existed outside the connection between his hands and the piano, between his heart and the music it had held onto through years of silence. The piece built toward its thunderous conclusion, Ray's body now fully engaged in the effort, swaying slightly with the music's powerful current. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he navigated the final difficult runs, but he didn't falter. And as he struck the final forceful chords, he realized his cheeks were wet with tears he hadn't felt falling. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, before the room erupted in genuine, enthusiastic applause. Ray remained seated, momentarily unable to move, the emotional toll of the piece leaving him drained but somehow lighter. As if some long-carried burden had been set down at last, a hand appeared at the edge of his vision offering a handkerchief. Ray looked up to find Mr. Tanaka himself standing beside the piano, eyes bright with appreciation. "Thank you," Ray murmured, accepting the cloth and quickly wiping his face. The elderly businessman bowed slightly. "No, thank you," he replied in accented English. "Music speaks truth when words cannot. You play with heart." Before Ray could respond, Ms. Chen appeared at Mr. Tanaka's elbow. "Mr. Henderson," she said, and Ray was startled that she knew his name. "I wasn't aware we had such talent on our staff." Ray stood, suddenly conscious of protocol. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. I was just filling in until the real pianist arrives." "I believe you are the real pianist," Mr. Tanaka interjected with a small smile. "The others are merely people who play piano." Ms. Chen's expression remained professional, but her eyes held a new awareness as she studied Ray. "How long have you worked in our building, Mr. Henderson?" 3 years, ma'am. And before that?" Ray hesitated, unaccustomed to being the focus of such attention, especially from the company's CEO. "I was studying for my master's in piano performance." "At the conservatory." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "What happened?" The question was direct, perhaps even intrusive, but Ray found himself answering anyway. "My wife got sick, cancer. After she passed, I had 2 young children to support. Music doesn't provide the stability they needed." Something shifted in Ms. Chen's expression, a softening around the eyes perhaps, or a slight downturn of the mouth. For a brief moment she seemed to be seeing Ray as a person rather than an employee function. "I see," she said simply. Mr. Tanaka cleared his throat gently. "In Japan we have a concept called ikigai, the thing that makes life worth living. For some it is so clear." He gestured toward the piano. "Your music, it has this quality." Ray didn't know how to respond. The concept of finding joy in playing seemed like a luxury he'd left behind, along with his dreams of performing professionally. "Would you continue playing for our guests, Mr. Henderson?" Ms. Chen asked, though her tone made it clear this wasn't really a question. "Your scheduled shift will of course be compensated at a different rate for the remainder of the evening." "Of course." Ray nodded, relief washing over him at the thought of the extra money. Tommy needed new winter boots, and Lily's piano teacher had recommended a more advanced keyboard for home practice. "Thank you." As Ms. Chen led Mr. Tanaka back to the other guests, Ray settled once more on the piano bench. The marketing executives who had mocked him earlier were nowhere to be seen, but he found he didn't care. Their opinion of him mattered far less than he'd thought. For the next 2 hours, Ray played everything from classical pieces to jazz standards to contemporary songs. Each selection met with appreciation from the guests who now viewed the piano area as the heart of the event, rather than mere background entertainment. By the time the gala began winding down near midnight, Ray's fingers were sore in a way they hadn't been in years, a good soreness, the kind that comes from using muscles for their intended purpose after a long rest. As the last guests began to leave, Ray played a final piece, a simple, haunting melody he had composed for Annie during her illness but had never played for anyone else. The notes hung in the air like a prayer or a promise, a private goodbye to a night that had unexpectedly changed something within him. What that change might mean for tomorrow he didn't yet know, but for tonight at least, Ray Henderson had remembered what it felt like to be fully himself. Ray trudged up the stairs to his third-floor apartment at 1:15 a.m., his body heavy with exhaustion but his mind strangely alert. The events of the evening played on repeat in his thoughts. The initial mockery, the feel of the grand piano under his fingers, the tears he couldn't hold back during the Chopin, and the unexpected attention from Ms. Chen and Mr. Tanaka. He unlocked the door quietly, not wanting to wake the kids or his brother-in-law. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of the TV, where Dave had fallen asleep on the couch, his large frame barely contained by the second-hand furniture. "Hey," Dave whispered, stirring as Ray hung his keys on the hook by the door. "How was work?" Ray paused, unsure how to answer. How could he possibly explain what had happened? "Different," he finally replied. "Thanks for staying with the kids." Dave nodded, stretching as he stood. "No problem. Tommy helped me fix that leaky faucet in the bathroom. Kid's got a knack for tools." He gathered his jacket and phone. "They both asked for you at bedtime. Lily wanted you to hear her play her new song." The familiar guilt tightened around Ray's chest. Another bedtime missed, another moment he couldn't get back. "I'll listen first thing tomorrow," he promised. After Dave left, Ray checked on the children, their small forms peacefully sleeping in the bedroom they shared. Lily had kicked off her blankets as usual, one arm flung dramatically across her pillow. Tommy slept curled on his side, still clutching the worn stuffed dog that had been his comfort object since Annie died. Ray gently tucked the blankets around them both, his heart aching with love and the endless worry that he wasn't doing enough, being enough. In the kitchen, he filled a glass of water and noticed a piece of paper on the table, a drawing from Lily. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall one labeled Daddy and 2 smaller ones for herself and Tommy. Above them, floating near the top of the page, was a 4th figure with wings and a halo, labeled Mommy. Ray's throat tightened as he carefully pinned the drawing to the refrigerator with a magnet. Sleep seemed impossible despite his exhaustion. Ray found himself drawn to the small electric keyboard set up in the corner of the living room. He plugged in headphones so he wouldn't wake the kids and began to play, his fingers moving through familiar patterns. The keyboard's plastic keys felt hollow after the grand piano's responsive touch, but the music still came, flowing from some place inside him that had awakened tonight and refused to go back to sleep. He played until his fingers cramped and his eyes grew heavy, finally collapsing into bed just before dawn. 3 hours later, Ray was awakened by Lily bouncing onto his bed, her small hands patting his face. "Daddy, Uncle Dave said you did piano at work. Did you play the big songs? Did people clap? Was there a princess there?" Ray groaned, pulling himself to a sitting position. Tommy appeared in the doorway, more reserved than his sister but equally curious. "Is it true, Dad?" he asked. "You played at that fancy party?" Ray nodded, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "I did. Their pianist couldn't make it, so I helped out." "Were you scared?" Tommy pressed. Ray considered the question. "A little at first, but then I just focused on the music." "Like you tell me to do for math tests," Tommy said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Exactly like that," Ray agreed, his heart warming at the connection. "Now who wants breakfast?" The weekend passed in its usual blur of laundry, grocery shopping, homework help, and the 1,000 small tasks that filled the life of a single parent. Ray took the children to the park on Sunday, watching as they played on the swings, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. Several times he found his fingers tapping out rhythms on the bench beside him, fragments of music bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rush of lunch packing and school drop-offs before Ray headed to Westfield Corporate Center. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would people treat him differently? Would they even remember? Part of him hoped the entire episode would be forgotten, allowing him to return to the comfortable anonymity of his janitorial role. He signed in at security as usual, but Bill the guard looked up from his crossword puzzle with raised eyebrows. "Henderson, heard you're some kind of piano genius. Johnson from night shift was there, said you had the whole room in tears." Ray felt his face grow warm. "Just filling in for an emergency," he mumbled. "Well, you're the talk of the building," Bill replied with a grin. "Never would have guessed." Similar reactions followed Ray throughout the morning as he moved through his regular cleaning routine. Several employees who had never before acknowledged his existence now nodded or smiled in recognition. A few even stopped him to compliment his playing. Each interaction left Ray feeling exposed, as if a protective layer had been stripped away. Just before lunch, as Ray was restocking paper towels in the executive floor bathrooms, Mr. Patterson approached with an unusual expression, somewhere between confusion and respect. "Henderson, Ms. Chen wants to see you in her office now." Ray's stomach dropped. Was he in trouble? Had he overstepped by playing at the gala? He quickly washed his hands and straightened his uniform, acutely conscious of how out of place he would look in the CEO's office. Ms. Chen's assistant, the same harried woman from the gala, led him into the corner office with the view of the city and the decorative grand piano that Ray had admired from afar for 3 years. The CEO herself sat behind her desk, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her. Ray sat gingerly, feeling like an imposter in the elegant space. "I've been doing some research on you over the weekend." Ray swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Ms. Chen continued, tapping a folder on her desk. "You were 2 months away from completing your master's degree at the conservatory when your wife passed away. Your professors speak highly of your talent. One called you the most promising pianist in a generation. You were scheduled to perform with the symphony before you withdrew from the program." Ray stared at her, stunned that she had gone to such lengths to investigate his background. "How did you—" "I made some calls," Ms. Chen replied simply. "Mr. Tanaka was quite impressed by your playing at the gala. So impressed, in fact, that he specifically mentioned you during our contract negotiations." Ray shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm glad I could help." "Help?" Ms. Chen raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Henderson, you didn't just help. According to Mr. Tanaka, your performance demonstrated our company's understanding of the importance of culture and artistic excellence. He signed the contract yesterday, a deal worth over $20 million. Ray blinked, trying to process this information. "I'm happy for the company." "I'd like to be happy for you as well," Ms. Chen replied, leaning forward slightly. "Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. I'm creating a new position within Westfield Corporation, Director of Cultural Affairs. The role would involve organizing musical events for our clients, representing us at cultural functions, and establishing a community outreach program focused on arts education." Ray's mind raced to keep up with her words. "That sounds like an excellent position for someone." "For you, Mr. Henderson," Ms. Chen clarified, a hint of impatience in her voice. "I'm offering you the job." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Me? But I'm the janitor." "You're a classically trained pianist with nearly a master's degree who happens to be working as a janitor," Ms. Chen corrected. "There's a difference." Ray gripped the arms of his chair. "I don't understand." "Why would you—" "2 reasons," Ms. Chen interrupted crisply. "First, talent like yours is rare and should be utilized. Second, I recognize the sacrifices you've made for your family's stability. This position would come with a significant salary increase, starting at $75,000 annually, with regular business hours." The figure hit Ray like a physical force. It was more than 3 times his current salary, enough to move to a better apartment, to afford proper piano lessons for Lily, to start a college fund for the kids, to breathe without the constant pressure of financial anxiety. He began, then stopped, overwhelmed by possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. Ms. Chen's expression softened slightly. "You don't need to answer immediately. Think about it. Discuss it with your children. The position would begin next month, giving you time to train your replacement in maintenance if you accept." Ray nodded, still unable to form coherent thoughts. Ms. Chen rose, indicating the meeting was over. "One more thing. Mr. Henderson," she said as he stood to leave. "I lost my father when I was 9. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I remember what that felt like." For a moment, the polished corporate executive vanished, revealing a glimpse of something more human underneath. Sometimes stability can come in unexpected forms. Back in the maintenance closet, Ray leaned against the wall, his mind whirling. The offer seemed impossible, like something from a dream. Could he really bridge the gap between the 2 halves of his life? Could he be both the responsible father who provided stability and the musician he'd trained to become? He pulled out his phone and looked at the background photo. Tommy and Lily at the beach last summer, their faces bright with laughter, sandy ice cream cones clutched in their small hands. What would Annie have advised? She had always believed in his talent, had seen his music as a gift rather than an impractical dream. "Your hands were made for piano keys, not mop handles," she had told him once, early in their relationship. He had laughed then, never imagining a future where he would have to choose. As his lunch break ended and Ray returned to his cleaning cart, He realized with sudden clarity that perhaps he didn't have to choose anymore. Perhaps there was a path where duty and passion could coexist. For the first time in 3 years, Ray allowed himself to imagine a different future, one where his children saw him not just as the dad who worked hard to keep them fed and housed, but as someone who followed his heart as well, someone who showed them that dreams didn't always have to be sacrificed, just sometimes reimagined. He pushed his cart toward the elevators, his steps lighter than they had been in years. Whatever decision he made, something had shifted inside him that couldn't be undone. The music had awakened again, and this time he wouldn't be so quick to silence it. 1 year later, Ray stood in front of the mirror in his new apartment, adjusting his tie with nervous fingers. The charcoal suit still felt strange after years of wearing a janitor's uniform, but he was slowly getting used to it. Outside the bathroom door, he could hear Lily practicing scales on her new piano, a real upright, not the electronic keyboard they'd had in the old place. "Dad, we're going to be late," Tommy called from the living room, already dressed in his own suit, looking suddenly older than his 10 years. "Coming, buddy," Ray answered, taking one last look at himself. The face in the mirror had changed over the past year. The constant worry lines around his eyes had softened, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Some kinds of concern, he'd learned, just came with being a parent. In the living room, Lily twirled in her blue dress, her hair decorated with the sparkly clips she'd insisted on buying for the occasion. "How do I look, Daddy?" she asked, executing a wobbly curtsy. "Like a princess," Ray replied truthfully, his heart swelling. At 7, Lily was the spitting image of her mother, the same dimple when she smiled, the same determined tilt of her chin when she concentrated on a difficult piano piece. "Is Auntie Meg meeting us there?" Tommy asked, referring to Annie's sister, who had become a more regular presence in their lives since Ray's schedule had become more predictable. "Yes, along with Uncle Dave and Grandma and Grandpa," Ray confirmed, gathering his keys and phone. "They're all excited to hear the new piece." Tommy nodded, a flicker of nervousness crossing his face. "Do you think Mom would be proud? Of tonight, I mean." Ray crouched down to meet his son's eyes, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders. "She'd be bursting with pride. Not just about tonight, but about how brave and strong you and Lily have both been. About how you've handled all the changes. And there had been many changes. The new job at Westfield had transformed their lives in ways Ray couldn't have imagined when he'd first sat at that grand piano a year ago. The steady hours and significantly higher salary had allowed them to move to a bright 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood, closer to the kids' school. More importantly, it had given Ray the chance to be present for his children in ways his previous schedule hadn't permitted, attending school events, helping with homework, and simply being home for dinner every night. The transition hadn't been perfectly smooth. There had been awkward moments when Ray encountered his former maintenance colleagues in the hallways of Westfield, now from the other side of the corporate divide. He'd made efforts to bridge that gap, inviting his old team to the cultural events he organized, making sure the maintenance staff received recognition for their essential work. Some of the executives who had once mocked him now treated him with a strained politeness, never quite meeting his eyes. Ray didn't mind. Their opinion mattered far less to him than the look on Tommy's face when he'd scored the winning goal at his soccer game and found his father cheering from the sidelines, not missing it because of an overtime shift. "We should go," Ray said, straightening up. "We don't want to be late for our own concert." The drive to Westfield Corporate Center was filled with Lily's excited chatter about her piano teachers, newest puppy and Tommy's more reserved observations about the city passing outside the window. Ray listened, still sometimes amazed by the simple miracle of having energy left to be truly present with his children at the end of a workday. The atrium of Westfield looked different tonight, transformed for the first annual Young Artist Showcase, the culmination of the community outreach program Ray had established as part of his new position. Rows of chairs faced a small stage where the grand piano, the same one Ray had played that fateful night, gleamed under carefully positioned lights. "Mr. Henderson," Ms. Chen's assistant greeted them at the entrance. "Everything's ready. We have a full house." Ray nodded his thanks, his eyes scanning the rapidly filling seats. This event had been his passion project, a scholarship program for musically gifted children from low-income families, funded by Westfield Corporation as part of their community engagement initiative. Tonight, after 6 months of weekly lessons, the first group of scholarship recipients would perform for their families, Westfield employees and several major donors, including Mr. Tanaka, who had flown in specifically for the event. Ray, a familiar voice called from behind him. Ray turned to see Dave approaching with Annie's parents and sister in tow. Hugs were exchanged, the children eagerly showing their grandparents the program for the evening. "We're so proud of you," Annie's mother whispered in Ray's ear as she embraced him. Annie would be too. Ray swallowed the lump in his throat. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to the kids." As his family found their seats, Ray led Tommy and Lily backstage where the other young performers were gathering with their parents. The nervous excitement in the room was palpable, as children in their best clothes clutched sheet music and instruments, some practicing fingering silently, others whispering to each other. Ms. Chen appeared at Ray's elbow, immaculate as always in a tailored suit. "Everything looks wonderful," she said. "Mr. Tanaka is quite impressed with what you've built." Ray smiled. "It's been a team effort." "Don't be modest, Mr. Henderson. This program was your vision." She glanced around at the children. "These opportunities wouldn't exist without your insight and persistence." Ray watched as Tommy helped a younger boy tune his violin, showing the patience and gentle confidence that sometimes startled Ray with its maturity. "Children need stability," he said quietly, "but they also need to see possibilities." Ms. Chen nodded, her usual businesslike demeanor softening slightly. Over the past year, Ray had come to recognize that beneath her polished corporate exterior was a person who genuinely cared about making a difference, even if she expressed it through spreadsheets and strategic initiatives rather than more obvious displays of emotion. "5 minutes until we begin," called the event coordinator, sending a ripple of nervous giggles through the assembled children. Ms. Chen excused herself to join the other executives in the front row, and Ray gathered the young performers for a final pep talk. "Remember," he told them, crouching down to meet their eyes, "music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something special from inside you with the people listening. If you make a mistake, just keep going. The music wants to be played." 20 pairs of eyes, including his own children's, looked back at him with a mixture of anxiety and determination. In those faces, Ray saw reflections of his younger self, of the passion for music that had been reignited in him after years of dormancy. When the time came, Ray stepped onto the stage to welcome the audience and introduce the program. Looking out at the sea of faces, corporate executives in expensive suits sitting alongside families who had taken buses from some of the city's poorest neighborhoods, he felt a moment of disbelief at the journey that had brought him here. "A year ago," Ray began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words, "I stood in this very spot as someone else entirely, a person who had set aside a fundamental part of himself in the name of stability and responsibility." He paused, finding the familiar faces of his children in the front row. "What I've learned since then is that we don't have to choose between being responsible and being true to ourselves. Sometimes, the most responsible thing we can do for those we love is to show them what it means to live with passion and purpose." The recital unfolded beautifully, each child performing with the earnest concentration that made even the simplest pieces touching. Ray watched from the side of the stage, his chest tight with pride as Lily played her Mozart piece without a single mistake. Her small face serious with concentration until the final note when she broke into a delighted smile. Tommy's turn came toward the end of the program. He wasn't a pianist like his sister and father, having discovered instead a talent for the cello. As he drew his bow across the strings, coaxing out the melancholy opening notes of Bach's Prelude in G, Ray found himself holding his breath. His son played with a sensitivity that belied his years, his eyes closed as he leaned into the music. When both his children had performed, Ray prepared for the evening's final piece. As director of the program, he'd resisted the suggestion that he should perform as well, feeling that the spotlight should remain on the children. But Ms. Chen and Mr. Tanaka had insisted, and eventually Ray had agreed to close the program with a piece of his own. As he settled himself at the piano bench, Ray took a moment to look out at the audience. In the front row sat his children, their faces shining with pride. Beside them, Annie's family, who had supported him through the darkest days after her death. Behind them, rows of Westfield employees, including several of his former colleagues from the maintenance department. And in the center, Ms. Chen and Mr. Tanaka, whose unexpected intervention had changed the course of his life. Ray placed his hands on the keys and began to play. Not Chopin or Debussy or any of the classical masters he had studied, but his own composition, a piece he'd been working on over the past year. It was called New Beginnings, and within its harmonies, he'd woven themes that represented his journey. Sections of struggle and grief giving way to tentative hope, building gradually to a resolution that wasn't perfect but was genuine and hard-won. As the final notes faded, Ray felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with his impromptu performance a year ago had closed. The janitor who had been asked to play as a joke had found his way back to being a musician, but with a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. The applause washed over him as he stood and bowed. But the only reaction he truly cared about was waiting for him at the edge of the stage, his children, rushing forward to embrace him, their arms tight around his waist. "Did I do okay?" Tommy whispered. "You were amazing," Ray assured him. "Both of you were. Are you happy, Daddy?" Lily asked, looking up with her mother's eyes. Ray pulled his children close, feeling the familiar weight of them against him, the most precious responsibility he would ever carry. "Yes," he said truthfully. "I'm happy." And for perhaps the first time since Annie had left them, it wasn't a reassurance or a half-truth meant to protect them. Ray Henderson, father, musician, teacher, and finally, fully himself, was genuinely happy.